for this session, welcome, Avichal. Figured we would maybe chat a little bit about, what makes Celo unique and exciting.
Cool.
You've been an early backer and supporter of Celo all the way back to
pre-Celo days.
Yeah, maybe 2018, maybe 2017.
Yeah.
Back when we first pitched you, you were super excited and very supportive. I guess maybe to kick things off.
Can I tell a funny story about that, though?
Yeah, let's do it.
I don't know how many people know this, but you probably, I think the ideas that you guys were kicking around, like pre-Celo, there was there's an identity idea. There was like a little bit of a precursor and build up into Celo, and I think some of those ideas made it into Celo. But there was also a travel startup. Do you remember that?
Yeah, a long time ago.
So for everybody here, in some alternate universe, Celo doesn't exist, and there's a really beautiful travel itinerary making startup that Renee and Sep and Marek are currently running.
I don't know if it would have survived COVID. So
that's true. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
I think
this reality's better. This version of reality's better.
Definitely better. But yeah, I guess thinking back to that time, I think we pitched you on what we wanted to do with Celo. First on Ethereum, and when that didn't work out as a platform in and of itself. And so yeah, I think curious what got you excited then, what gets you excited now. Yeah, why Celo?
Man, we can talk about that for a long time. It's good to see you. Thank you all for coming. For me, in the early days, it was just about the people. And, my background is mostly as an entrepreneur, and it's funny, I've been an investor now full-time for a few years. We still build a lot of stuff internally, but in my own head, I'm not really a VC. So I sometimes use third person sort of stuff when I'm talking about investors. But, like so much of my day-to-day is trying to find really excellent people who have differentiated worldviews. And a lot of doing startups early stage, investing in startups early stage is about finding people who have some insight into the way the world should be that is different than the way the world is, but also have the skills to make that happen. And then a little, sprinkling of these are probably the only people in the world that could pull that off. And it's just an expression of who they are. And so if you look at like all of the best and most successful startups that eventually become big companies, and then you look at the DNA of those things, they're just like the people personified. And so you can't swap out the founding teams, you can't swap out the CEOs. You can't take Zuck and put him in charge of Google. It just wouldn't work. So many of the
it wouldn't work. Zuck running Google?
It'd be terrible. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with Elon and Twitter now, right? Like it's, what happens when you really have somebody who has very different DNA than the company, and like what happens when you swap that out is kind of an interesting exercise. But with the Celo team, it was so obvious that you had people who were very, very technically brilliant and were well-intentioned. And if it's hard to remember, I don't know how many people in the room were around in 2017, but this was like peak ICO mania. And the closest thing we've had in the last 2 years is probably peak NFT mania. And when you have that kind of a mania, you just get a bunch of grifters. You just get people that want to do it for the short term, and there's like a lot of bad actors that enter the space. And it was so obvious that the Celo team was just a bunch of good actors, like motivated by the right things, very long-term oriented. And maybe we can talk about this later too, but I think had a differentiated worldview. And I think continue to, and it really shows in the community. Like if you just look at what the Celo community talks about, it's how will financial, how do financial systems work in the developing world? How do we have, how do we work with the UN World Food Program to do something efficient? How do we have refi instead of DeFi? Like just the stuff that the community produces is really different, which I think is very values aligned with the people that start the thing. And even in 2017, it was pretty obvious that the Celo ecosystem, because it would be a personification of the founders, would actually produce really, really different stuff. And ultimately, that's what you need. If you don't produce differentiated things in the world, then like people won't care, you know. And so ultimately, that was the thing that was so obvious. It's just like the founders were going to produce something really, really different than what was already happening in crypto.
Wow, yeah, I don't think I can add much to that. I definitely agree wholeheartedly. And it's why we put on events like this to bring the community together. So it's really great to see you guys here.
It's just so obvious too. I mean, like the vibe is just so different. Like if you listen to the conversations that happen in the hallways and Celo events, they're just so different than if you know, like Breakpoint is happening right now. If you walk through the halls of a Solana event, it's just like really different conversations. Or even Ethereum, you know, it's just like each community has its own vibe, and the Celo community just has a very different feel to it in terms of the kinds of projects and things that people are talking about. It's very, very differentiated. I think it's one of the most interesting and I hesitate to use the word defensible, but it is like the thing that makes, it is one of the things that makes Celo really unique, is the community just has a really, really different feel to it versus other crypto communities.
That's awesome. One thing that I think we've done well as well, and I'm biased, is also on the technology front. I think we've innovated a lot with, you know, the first EVM compatible proof of stake chain, first chain to let you pay for gas with tokens, first chain that has a ZK Snark like client, first chain to be carbon negative. You know, of all of these and the many others that we've done as well and have led with, like what excites you on the tech front? You know, I think as an investor you see a lot of exciting tech. What gets you excited when you think about Celo as a technology platform?
It's a good question. I'm very curious what you think too, because you've actually built a bunch of this stuff. I think there's two that jump out for me. One is just the core L1 consensus and infra. You know, like the fact that it actually works. And I think there's only been like one instance of downtime in, you know, how many ever years. It's like pretty amazing, actually.
2.5 years, yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. To actually build a system that doesn't go down, just like pretty core and very underappreciated. I mean, launching a new L1 is hard enough if you just look at people who've managed to do that successfully and do it in a decentralized way and actually have, you know, validators and build a proper network that is actually resilient. But then it doesn't go down. It's actually quite a technical accomplishment. So I think that's very, very impressive. And then, you know, kind of back to the roots of some of this stuff, I think some of the things you were playing with and that actually shipped around, for example, being able to send money to a phone number, you know, without that person necessarily being on the network yet, and some, you know, how you did that with like light clients, and it's just like a lot of innovation in terms of like just solving. If everybody goes back, I mean, the original roots of this stuff were literally in the Bitcoin white paper as a peer-to-peer payment system, right? That's actually what it was supposed to be, and it's sort of we've grown far beyond that, obviously. But I think that core problem in a lot of the world is still unsolved. It's actually, how do I just pay people? And that's, you know, one of the fundamental building blocks of an economy. Like the entire GDP of a country is based on the ability to do that. And I think there's actually a lot of underappreciated technical breakthroughs in terms of how do you do that on mobile in a global payment system that you guys innovated on. And you're much more qualified to talk about how that actually works than I am. But I remember thinking that was actually pretty amazing that you guys legitimately solved that problem. Yeah,
certainly. I mean, I think if you think about all the things that went into Celo, both pre and post-launch, certainly the consensus protocol, certainly the ability to pay for gas with tokens, making it actually feasible to use for payments. These are certainly some of the things that get me, that I'm most proud of. I think the other thing, which I guess maybe isn't technical, but I think also really kickstarted a lot of what Celo is today, is the on-chain governance proposal that we passed back 2.5 years ago. I guess one technical innovation that Celo had that is actually rare for L1s, even to this day, is full on-chain governance. We had it on day one 2.5 years ago when we launched on Earth Day 2020. And the first governance proposal that
I was just going to ask you about this.
Yeah.
Does anybody know, by show of hands, do people know what the first governance proposal on Celo was? Yeah, like a small number of people do. This is like a great insight into, this goes back to like the community that we were talking about before. Anyway, sorry to cut you off. I think this is like one of those great lore stories that I think is really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, so if you had to guess, maybe for the folks who don't know, what would you guess was the first governance proposal on Celo 2.5 years ago? The name. Actually, that's a good point. The one governance proposal, not the first, but a few governance proposals later, was actually changing the asset name from CGLD to Celo. That passed very quickly. But there is still one exchange that hasn't changed the ticker name. They still keep CGLD. That exchange is Coinbase, which is really, really funny, especially since they launched after the governance proposal passed.
That's hilarious.
But no, the first governance proposal was around making Celo carbon negative. The community came together. They wanted to put a stake in the ground and say, hey, not all chains need to be bad for climate change. Celo already is proof of stake. It's already using very little electricity to run, but we can do better even than that. We can actually offset little carbon that it is contributing and actually offset more so that we can be not just carbon neutral, but carbon negative. And so that was the first proposal, and it effectively enabled the chain itself through block rewards to buy carbon offset credits from Project Ren programmatically. It's been doing that for 2.5 years, and if you look around, this has been something that other chains have started to copy, which from our perspective is amazing because it means we're helping fight climate change better together. But yeah, this was the first thing we did.
But how cool is that? Like, what a great insight into like community and values, and I think it's awesome. But yeah, I mean, and it's so differentiated, right? It's just like it's such a cool insight that that's what the community would produce. As a starting point. It's just so different than the other communities. I love it.
Yeah, and that was just 2.5 years ago. If you think about what we're doing now, I think Celo is becoming, I think in large part because of this, it's becoming kind of the home of refi. There's going to be some really great refi talks today. But we're doing other things too that are pretty new and interesting. And one is around on and off ramping. Maybe some of you have heard of Fiat Connect, which is an open API standard for on and off ramping. There's also this Connect the World initiative that allows you that's incentivizing the adoption of Fiat Connect. We really see a world where, this vision around payments that you talked about from the Bitcoin white paper, we're finally gonna see it, hopefully in the next cycle. And it's not gonna be overnight when everyone's gonna be suddenly paying salaries with crypto and buying groceries with crypto. It's gonna clearly happen slowly, which means that people will have to go in and out of fiat quite easily to enable that kind of transition towards kind of a total infrastructure inversion where everything starts happening on public chains. And to do that, we need seamless on and off ramps that any wallet, any dApp can trivially integrate. And so that's Fiat Connect. It's an open API standard so that when a new on and off ramp comes up, you can just, through a configuration change, add it to your wallet, add it to your dApp. And we definitely see a world where there's going to be hundreds, if not thousands of these focused on every little market with all of the local banking relationships needed, all of the licenses needed to do this in a fully compliant way. And that the only way we can integrate thousands of these is with an open API standard. And so we're pushing for that now. I think we're one of the only chains really thinking about this problem. And I'm excited to, in 3 years, be back here going, oh, remember when we did that? Yeah. Like, hey, look, it really worked out. And look how amazing the world is now that we can go in and out of fiat so easily.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's interesting too. I'm very curious to see who starts to build on top of that and where those people are and where those developers are, because one of the other things too, kind of adjacent to all those APIs, is it's always so interesting to see who picks it up first on Celo, and it's always really, really good people. Like I think the ability for the community to pull in really high caliber people from all over the world, and because they're so mission oriented, it's like such an that piece of infrastructure is going to pull in a bunch of other mission-oriented people who actually see the fundamental problem and want to solve the problem, which I think in this part of the crypto cycle is really important. Like when the noise goes away and the money goes away and everything's crashing and it feels terrible, the thing that actually gets you to the other side is having a mission alignment and like a mission orientation. So it's great. So if anybody wants to work on that, I don't know if there are people here who want to work on top of that API, but you should come talk to Marek.
Yeah, or even implement the API if you have money transmission licenses in certain countries. Yeah, there's definitely teams from Google, ex-Google, ex-MIT that are doing this right now. So I think, yeah, the teams are really, really strong. There's also, I think as of today, this is pretty exciting, T-Mobile announced kind of an incubator / hackathon, multi-month endeavor.
With some big prizes too.
Yeah, $600K dollars or euros. I guess they're the same now. In prize money. T-Mobile is owned by Deutsche Telekom, hence the euros. Yeah, Deutsche Telekom has been in the ecosystem for a while. They've been running a validator for I think a year and a bit now. They hold Celo in their treasury, and it's just really amazing to see them.
They hold treasury like in their like public company, like on the balance sheet treasury.
That's right.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's super cool.
Yeah, and they're excited about mobile payments, remittances, and broadly Web3, and now they're working with the broader Web3 community to help, incubate some of these really great ideas. So if any of you are builders and you like the idea of getting a piece of that 600K, I think there's also a free flight to Germany out of it too, which is pretty cool. Check it out. It just got announced today.
Yeah, if you're American, everything's on sale in Europe right now.
Yeah. And England.
Yeah. What else are you looking forward to? What else is coming up?
Yeah, great question. Well, Celo 2.0, I think is another exciting thing. I think someone was just, while we were in the coffee line out by the entrance, someone was asking me, there's SWE, there's Aptos, they're all launching exciting new platforms. Like, how does Celo fit in with all of this? We're going to be talking a lot more about that in the afternoon session on Celo 2.0. But just to give you a sneak preview, Aptos launched with Hot Stuff as a consensus protocol. That was kind of the cutting edge protocol that Facebook and Libra and DM created over the last few years. But SWE and Miston Labs have been working on kind of the evolution of this called Narwhal mixed with Bull Shark. It's a more scalable way of doing hot stuff effectively. And the Celo Foundation has been actually working with Miston Labs for the last year to bring Narwhal to Celo, Narwhal and Bull Shark to Celo. I think we're making sure that Celo continues to innovate. I think we've had a lot of firsts, the ones I just mentioned earlier, and that's not going away. We're really heads down building, making sure that the platform itself continues to evolve and in some cases leapfrog other things that are launching, right now that people are excited about. So definitely a lot of really exciting innovation happening on the core platform as well.
Cool. Do you want to do questions? We have a few minutes. 6 or 7 minutes.
Sure.
I saw a hand go up over here. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask, does Deutsche Telekom or you guys, do you hold the euros and euro dollars or euros? And if so, why not?
Which euros, sorry?
Are you familiar with euro dollar? What euro dollar are?
So on Celo, there's this Mento protocol that has crypto collateralized backed stablecoin. They have 3, one of which is C Euro. Is that the one you're talking about, or are you talking about Eurocoin by Circle?
European bank, euro dollar is US dollars held in time deposit accounts in banks outside the US.
Oh, you're talking about TradFi euro dollars.
Yes.
Gotcha.
That's what I'm talking about.
So what was the question?
Does Deutsche Telekom hold euro dollars or euros? And did they give you euros or euro dollars?
Yeah, so I don't know exactly what they hold for their operations. I'm guessing it's euros. They're public company in Europe. And then, yeah, they're funding the prizes. And so they're not giving them to us. They're giving them directly to the recipients of the prize winners of this kind of hackathon.
I'm just wondering if they allocated it before or after the euro kind of crashed into the dollar. So I'm trying to understand, I think there's something bigger here, especially with CUSD and how that can be collateralized against other FX pairs.
Yeah, I think fundamentally, I guess you're talking about FX hedging and de-risking, and I think that's a really fascinating area, and one that I think crypto is really well positioned to help out with. Probably not for folks, big public companies in Europe, because I think they have a lot of the expertise and the access to all of these different instruments to do this, and I'm sure they're
not yet at least.
Pardon?
Not yet at least.
Not in crypto, but in traditional FX. But it's I think the smaller companies that typically lack access, and I think that's where crypto is going to be really interesting.
And building on that, I think you see this in a lot of markets where it's sort of, if anybody's read Clayton Christensen, Innovator's Dilemma, this is sort of like classic Innovator's Dilemma. It's like starts on the fringes, and so there are a lot of people in the world that would want access to the Eurodollar system that may not have access to it, or euros and programmatic access to those things. Totally. Yeah, you could offer it that way, or like programmatic access via APIs. There are a lot of developers in the world that could build this. Like there are these sort of fringe markets where you could do this.
Just do a very simple FX bot that just hedges against
Totally.
pairs and automatically generates.
It's a great idea. You should build that. You should put it in the hackathon.
Someone build it. I'm literally going to do it.
Awesome.
Eat that set. Let's do it.
There you go.
Okay, there we go.
Any other questions? We have a few minutes. Sure. Yes.
Yeah, maybe we can repeat the question too for the camera. So the question was, Fiat Connect sounds interesting. Who are the folks on and off ramp side that are implementing Fiat Connect? Are they exchanges? Are they banks? And I think the answer is it's a mix of a lot of different types of entities. Typically, it's entities that have money transmission licenses for the markets that they want to operate in. We've seen companies that have partnered with banks. We've seen companies that offer remittances that have those licenses for their remittance operations. And we've also seen exchanges, absolutely. And so it's a whole mix of these. Typically, it's companies that want a piece of that $20 million. The prize money is pretty compelling. And it's being distributed in an interesting way. It's distributed evenly across all markets, regardless of how big the market is. As long as it's over 2 million people, the prize money is the same. And so that incentivizes on and off ramps in a lot of the smaller markets to come up. And that's where we're seeing the biggest need right now, because the big markets, they tend to be well serviced already by kind of the wires, the ramps of the world. But we need better on and off ramping in really in every country in the world, and that means right now where those big companies aren't operating.
Question here.
Are there any geographies where you see outsized adoption on the platform?
That's a good question. Are there any geographies where you see outsized adoption on the platform?
Yeah, really great question. It's hard to say from just looking at on-chain data, obviously, but if you query companies that do have insights into this, be it dApps or wallets in the ecosystem, I would say we see a pretty good mix across 4 continents. The US or North America tends to frequently dominate, but Latin America is number 2 for sure. Market-wise, country-wise, we see countries like Brazil, we see countries like Nigeria frequently appearing in kind of the top 5 lists. And then I think also because we do have a lot of companies, big companies like Deutsche Telekom in Europe. We're definitely seeing a lot of activity in Europe as well.
Question over here.
You mentioned working with listed labs and Bullshark on Celo. I'm wondering what advantages that brings to
Yeah, so the question was, what advantages does, I think, Narwhal and Bullshark bring to Celo? The one reason why I'm very excited about Narwhal and Bullshark is that you can scale transaction ordering, not execution, but ordering, in a fully horizontal manner. And I think that's definitely a bit of a holy grail. You still have to scale execution, which is challenging, and there are many different strategies for doing that. But to be able to at least scale transaction ordering in a fully horizontal manner, that's clearly a massive win for any layer 1. And so that's one really exciting thing about Narwhal.
They actually did I saw some really good visualizations of this. Maybe, I'm trying to remember if it was on Twitter or YouTube, but you want to use an example of where like transaction ordering actually gives you horizontal scale improvements? Like what's an example of how that might work?
Like how much can you scale?
Well, how much can you scale, but what's an example of like how you could take, like why the ordering of certain kinds of transactions that don't depend on each other might actually give you more throughput?
Yeah, I mean, so certainly not having to order transactions that are not related to each other, I think is interesting, and there's a lot of work being done in that area as well. But this is actually in addition to Narwhal.
Yeah.
Narwhal alone has been shown through various experiments to be able to scale transaction ordering up to 100,000 transactions per second. So this is pretty impressive. And again, you still have to execute those transactions. So depending on your VM, you're going to have other limitations that might hinder you getting to that throughput ultimately. But at least for transaction ordering, that's a pretty amazing feat.
Here, sitting down, and then we'll go.
Yeah. It's a question for both of you, but it's really about the sort of long-term sort of path of blockchain. So if you look at operating systems in the 80s or 90s, they're super different. There's a lot of competition, and then they eventually all have the same feature set. They're pretty much equivalent, right? If you look at blockchains now, there's a lot of ways in which they are differentiated, but you can imagine in a year or two, like they're all going to be pretty much in parity. And the question is, and then we have cross-chain bridges happening, which allows all these applications to talk to one another. And I'm just curious, like, what your view of the long-term path is, and how Celo really differentiates itself from that perspective.
It's an excellent question. Do you want to take it? Do you want me to take it? I have thoughts too.
Yeah, why don't you start, and then I have thoughts too.
So the question was, I think it's a really excellent observation and a really good analogy. Like, if you look back at the history of operating systems, there was a moment in time, whether it's phone operating systems or PCs, that it was highly fragmented, and there were many, many operating systems, and then it sort of converged, and you tended to get like two big winners. So it's a great observation. And as an aside, I love questions like this. Like as one of the really fun things about being an investor, other than working with great founders, is you sort of have to become like a technological historian or archaeologist and like look at the history of these things and like, well, why did it work out that way, and what's different today, but what can we learn from history? So I think it's an excellent question. So I think there are kind of like 2 or 3 lessons from the operating system era that apply here. One is exactly that, is that over time you tended to see convergence in feature sets, and then like you sort of had an arms race, and it was like, well, if everybody has all the feature set that looks the same, like what's really different between these things? It's a great observation. Second observation is that there's always platform risk, right? There's sort of like things that sort of can sit on top of the platform, can get absorbed into the platform over time, and that's like one common way for operating systems to build out their feature sets. The third is sort of this like who has leverage over whom question, and so there's actually some great history on this. You can go read like the Acer CEO in the 80s, late 80s, wrote about how his prediction was that Windows and Intel would win all the market share, and actually Acer and Dell and Gateway would kind of get squeezed in the middle, and he was totally right. And there's like market structural reasons that happens. And so that's like one interesting set of analogs you can make, operating systems. I think the other one that you could make from history is actually social networks, which are highly network effect dependent businesses. The reason I think that's an interesting one is that has not converged quite in the same way. Like, yeah, Facebook is huge, but so is TikTok. So is years from now when everybody has sort of solved a number of the technical problems and everybody's converged on roughly the same solutions. That's actually the defensibility. That's the thing you can't fork away. And that value system, I think, is really, really, really important. And staying true to that value system and not diluting that value system, I think, is actually the thing that's going to make this work long term. Wow. Okay. I think that's a great way to end. I think we're a little over time. So